He was so badly beaten, they reckon they found some of his teeth in his stomach.
His teeth were in his stomach, his jaws were broken, he was in danger for some time of losing an eye.
A leading Irish football star, two Dublin godfathers, the Penguin and the Monk, and a violent slaying by Yugoslavian gunmen sounds like a plot from a best-selling crime novel or explosive Netflix series, but was a reality for Derek Dunne and his family, who went from adored St Patrick's football star to brutally murdered alleged drug kingpin. In the 90s, Dublin was entering a dangerous time, on the brink of another drug epidemic, last seen in the dark days of the 80s.
And the arrival of a drugs crisis, but in areas that were already massively disadvantaged.
You could see it very clearly on the streets and everywhere around you, unless you were blind, you know.
I mean, you must realise and understand we're in our third generation of people with drug problems. Now, I mean, that's high. It's high for an area that was only built in 1948.
It became very visible over the years, you know, through the 90s, that there was a lot of drug dealing.
It was alleged by the press and campaigners that Derek Maradona Dunne, the super fit football star who was the poster boy of North Inner City Dublin, a man who the children were told to look up to, rather than the underworld figures who made money from crime, was in fact a leading distributor of drugs in the city. He was suspended by St Patrick's and put under investigation by the guards and shunned by some of the community who once supported him.
The way it was affecting people was, it was to children, and people were terrified sometimes to come out. I mean, then there was a playing area across from the flats, and it got to the stage where they were just lying around, and some of them was actually shooting up in front of the kids. Like, they didn't care, you know.
Despite the interest by guards looking into where the flash cars and money was coming from, Dunne denied the allegations and went about his business in the city, not bending to pressure applied by accusers. Dunne, a married man with two children, had left his wife for Rachel Mitchell, the beautiful daughter of an alleged Mr. Big criminal in Dublin called George Mitchell, dubbed the Penguin by the press. George Mitchell is from the Ballyfermont, a suburb in the southwest of Dublin, but Derek Dunne's area was the North Inner City, controlled by the vast Hutch family and friends. Gerry the Monk Hutch was somewhat of an underworld folk hero in Dublin, and especially his stomping ground of the North Inner City. It was said the monk, moniker handed to him by the press also, was due to him despising drugs after seeing friends and family members falling foul of the smack epidemic, and was a staunch old-school type of criminal godfather. As a kid, he was the alleged leader of the press-dubbed Bugsy Malones, such called after the film depicted kids as American mobsters. The Irish press were in a frenzy over the Dublin Bugsy Malones, who were seen as a threat to civilised society for the robberies and mischief they were getting up to. Hutch himself was blamed for several big armed robberies, but was never found guilty in a criminal court.
Security firm today, but behind the scenes in the rear of the building, Gardaí forensic experts were trying to piece together how 5 men last night carried out one of the most daring robberies in the state's history. It was a meticulously planned raid with a good deal of preparatory work carried out in advance. The gang had cut saplings, removed bolts and sawn through fittings to gain access through the outer fence. They had also laid a bridge of planks across a ditch to facilitate their entry and exit. Then they broke through a second fence into Brink's yard with a stolen blue Mitsubishi Pajero. They smashed through the door to the company where the cash was being transferred from a security truck to the vaults. 2 of the 5 masked raiders overpowered staff and quickly transferred the money.
In an infamous interview with a journalist, he attempted to clear his name and came out of a line that is inscribed in Dublin's gangland history.
I'm beginning to believe I've done it myself from reading it in the paper. When you read these things every week after week, there must be no smoke without fire. It looks that way, it sounds that way. If it barks, it's a dog.
The peace and quiet between Dunne and his associates and the Hutch clan exploded into violence when Derek Dunne caught a nephew of Gerry Hutch smashing his flashcar windows. Dunne's reaction was way out of scale for the crime. In a fit of rage, he savagely attacked the young man, beating him to an inch of his life, knocking his teeth literally down his throat into his stomach, breaking his jaw and battering his body. The young Hutch was found and rushed to hospital, where he was put on a life support machine. A crazy move by Dunne, but perhaps he didn't know the lad who had vandalised his car was a Hutch. Or maybe hubris was running strong, and he felt invincible with his support from the alleged Mr. Big, George Mitchell.
he got out of hospital last Thursday.
So he has survived
yeah,
this particular
he has
beating,
survived. And the monk or his brother decided that a contract should be put out on the former League of Ireland footballer. So, unfortunately,
that is the situation.
That is it. Well, actually, there was a meeting last Wednesday night between representatives of both gangs, and the situation was resolved somewhat.
Somewhat.
Yeah,
because one of the papers, I've been looking at the headlines during the commercial break, and one of them says that external hitmen are being brought in. I mean,
from research, it seems that Dunne moved to Liverpool after this encounter and was to be caught up in a drug scandal where it was alleged that he, his brother David, and associates were prosecuted on the charge of bringing drugs into Ireland from England, a charge Dunne strongly denied. During this period, George Mitchell had also moved and had set his business operations up in Amsterdam, partly due to the politician Tony Gregory using his Parliament privileges to name Mitchell, Thomas Boxer Mullins, and Derek Dunne as drug pushers in the city of Dublin. This coincided with the Criminal Assets Bureau, a cross-division unit set up to target individuals who may not have been convicted but could not legitimately account for their vast wealth. Many senior figures fled Dublin to escape cab's clutches, but interestingly, Gerry the Mug Hutch had made good use of the tax amnesty brought in Ireland prior to '96 to legitimise the money he had made from criminal enterprise. Hutch would end up being collared by cab, but would settle on a fee. Derek Dunne's day in the dock came after 8 months on remand, where he was sensationally cleared of all charges to euphoria from the public gallery. It was soon after himself and Rachel decided to move over to Amsterdam with her father and family, well out of the reach of cab and the Hutches. There is little factual research that can be done on Dunne's business operation in Amsterdam, but it's alleged by the press and police that he was a senior figure controlling George Mitchell's international drugs business, whilst Mitchell was serving time in Holland for electronics robbery. It's clear Dunne had strong affiliations with English criminals, especially from the Liverpool region and beyond, and had become established and respected in Amsterdam. In 2000, Derek Dunne's partner Rachel Mitchell opened the door to friends of Dunne's, one a Scouser who was cuffed and held at gunpoint by Yugoslav gunmen. But why would they turn up at Dunne's house in the middle of the night? It's important to note in the 90s, Amsterdam was in the early days of becoming a real hotbed for criminality and violence from the Dutch, Irish, Yugoslavs, Russians, English, and other international crime gangs. You name a serious outfit, and they would have had a presence in the Dam or other regions of Holland, and there was much jockeying for position in the criminal hierarchy. To give a good insight into actually what went down, I'm going to hand over to Isabel Conway, whom covered this for the Irish Independent in Amsterdam at the trial, so we can get an accurate look at the reasons behind and who was involved. Gunned down Dunne confronted enforcers. Murdered Irish drugs baron Derek Dunne had £500,000 guilders, around £175,000, and thousands of pounds worth of drugs stashed at his Amsterdam hideout, a Dutch court heard yesterday. The last violent seconds in the life of millionaire drugs trafficker Maradona Dunne, fatally injured when drugs gang members called to his home and a gunfight broke out last June, were recalled. Armed with a revolver hidden under a newspaper, the 33-year-old Irish gangland figure opened the door and was confronted by a Dutch drug supplier who earlier claimed he was owed money by Dunne for an ecstasy shipment and who told him, "If you want to stay alive, don't make problems." Dunne, according to witness statements, shouted, "So you want your money, do you?" before opening fire. After wounding two of the intruders, the former League of Ireland footballer lay bleeding to death from a bullet which had punctured a neck artery, as his wife Rachel and their two young children ran screaming from the house. A Croatian member of Dutch-based criminal gang involved in drugs trafficking and extortion, Zenko Galic, 29, is accused of murdering Dunne. A second Croatian, Milan Bogovic, is charged with being an accessory to the murder, while a third, Zoran Maksimovic, from the Yugoslav Republic, is charged with extortion, kidnapping, and drugs trafficking. Dunne was suspected of supplying huge amounts of green, brown, and ecstasy to Ireland after moving to Holland. An armed gang had been recruited by a criminal debt collector to force 3 English drug dealers to repay debts to suppliers, the court heard. The dealers were beaten, threatened, and taken hostage by the gang, who demanded 10,000 guilders. Hostage George Whitby, 25, from Liverpool, said he took Gaelic, who was armed, and the Dutchman, who was owed money by Dunne, to Dunne's rented house. They arrived around midnight, and the door was opened by Dunne, who was holding a gun concealed under a newspaper. He was standing in the dark inside the doorway, and when he fired, I drew my pistol and fired without thinking, near the fireball. I fired 2 shots at the Irishman, said Gaelic. Dunne did not die at the scene, but after being taken to hospital, the Dutchman shot by Dunne, who fired first, remained in a critical condition for months and has declined to make any statement. State Prosecutor A.C. Mann called for Gaelic to be jailed for 10 years. But that would not be the end of the story for the Dunne family's worries in Amsterdam. Months after the violent episode, David Dunne, Derek's brother, was caught up in a fight amongst Irish friends in an apartment where they all pulled blades and knifed each other. David Dunne ended up on the run. I'd be interested to know from my Irish subs to what happened to David Dunne after him escaping and being on the run in Holland, as I reached a dead end with my research on him. To finish up, I'd like to point out that although the press freely claimed that Dunne was definitively a major dealer, he was never found guilty of serious offences, and therefore it does need to be clarified that the allegations from the guards and press have not been borne out of a criminal court of law, a fact that the press in both Ireland and the UK often choose to disregard. With that being said, as always, be safe, please smash the like button and subscribe. Until the next time, the Inquirer out.